Well, gentlemen, we are live. So welcome to another edition of our, what do we call this? Our Monday night live.
Yeah.
Um, and we are here to talk about Jesus in various ways. Uh, yeah, we just finished one book study, and now we're gonna hop on to another. So guys, introduce yourselves.
I'm Todd Littleton. I pastor Snow Hill, the church in Tuttle, Oklahoma, flyover country, just southwest of Oklahoma City.
I'm Josh Moneykeisen. I am a local pastor in the United Methodist Church here in the middle of the state of Virginia.
Not for much longer. Well,
Well,
I
I'm
guess
just going 20 minutes
yeah.
down the road.
Yeah, never mind. Okay. All right. So we are here. My name is Jason. And if you guys have thoughts or questions, please leave them here in the message thread, and Todd will diligently keep track of them. But we are going to talk about this little book that just came out um, this spring called Jesus Changes Everything by Stanley Hauerwas, a collection of passages from his works. But before we do that, Todd, you and a little bit me were at the 17th Mockingbird Conference in New York City at Calvary St. George's Episcopal Church. And so Mockingbird is the thing that you and I have both written and spoken for. It is a network that catches up a lot of the people in our audience as well. And so I had to bug out early, so I thought maybe you could give us some of your thoughts and takeaways from the 2.5 days.
Okay. Yeah, I probably will may do a little bookending, and that is that I think it was a good change. I don't know, Jason, if it was 2 or 3 years ago, where rather than Dave Saul being the last speaker of the event, was the first. I think that helps set the theme, this undercurrent, if you will, that runs through. And of course, since he had a new book released and that coincided with the event, that did help. But I think in his I can't remember if it's his short or his long version about the book and the event, but he made this line, gave this line. I remember when, and I've actually got something I'm working on in light of what he said. But he remembers when he discovered grace in a way other than in a hymn sing,
Hmm.
and that um, whatever the circumstances of his life were, however he had received the gospel, it had left him with a bit of anxiety. Whether we could debate whether that's maybe a natural feature of David's all, I don't know, but it is certainly comes with a certain way the gospel's presented, where um, in a generous way, where it sounds like more law than grace. So that when you hear grace radically offered, um, and you have this, and it's in the title of his book, you have this sense of relief. And maybe the reason I draw that out a bit at the beginning is um, I had that same experience growing up in the context I did. I understood the claims of what God has done in Christ Jesus. I understood what it meant to trust, but there was not necessarily a clear distinction that in order to really be a good boy, that you had to perform and keep what might sound like a 613 laws
Mm-hmm.
anew. And so I had moment from the time I was about 9 or 10, not always assaulted with we used to call it this way, did I say it right? Did I do it right? Did I feel it right? and so you had these recurring moments. And then I went to college, and I had some conversations and did some um, more theological reading than I would have done, and heard a better description of grace, and all of that internal anxiety that was created by my lack of keeping 613 laws. Um, well, it was met with relief, and so I think that was a dominant theme that ran throughout all the talks, or for the most part, all the ones I couldn't attend all the breakouts, but the major speakers, for example, our own Tony Robinson or Anthony Robinson how many you may have to find his books, but he did a fantastic job, and I hope that maybe if this gets back to Tony, he'll understand what I mean by this. But um, Tony doesn't strike you when he's been in our Monday class as this force of nature, but I'll tell you, he got up there and spoke in a way that
He likes to be in nature, but not a
oh,
force of nature.
that may be what it is. That's probably what it is. But he just really had a really good presentation along those lines, and what was really helpful too was maybe what I shared with you about how David talked about the big relief didn't quite connect, but Tony had a similar kind of description, but in a different context. But nonetheless, it was the same, that when you grasp grace in the way that I think we're intended to, then and some of the normal anxieties that accompany our sense of how we might ought to respond to the good news takes on a different character, a different tone, a tenor, and I think, frankly, a bit more freedom.
I think listening to you talk, Todd, part of the dynamic of grace being a gift is that it has to come to you through ways that neither you nor the people around you can orchestrate, right?
Right.
So that, like Dave mentioned, how so he grows up in the Episcopal Church. It's not like it's the first time he's heard the message, right? But it takes him being an anxious, maybe depressed junior in high school and discovering this documentary of Brian Wilson playing this song with a broken mouth at the piano about love and mercy, and for it to click, right? It's not like you didn't grow up not hearing the message.
Right.
You just weren't right in the right place. And I've heard Dave's brother John talk about being an addict and stumbling into a Episcopal service and hearing the same prayer of confession and absolution that he'd heard a million times growing up, but for the first time it finally landed. And so it's a lot of times when people are like, I never heard this before, I have to no, it's not like every pastor and preacher you've ever had was unfaithful. It's just for whatever reason.
That's right.
God has chosen for it to land with you now.
That's a very good point. Yeah, good.
Josh,
I
any thoughts?
wasn't at Mockingbird. I did get to catch Tony's talk though, and I thought it was great. I don't know, when I was listening to you talk, I was trying to think back on not a time that I've experienced it, but the first time. And I just guess one that sticks out was, I remember I had to me, it was sort of unique in my my sense of call to begin pastoral ministry. And I won't go through all that story right now, but needless to say, I'd already responded. I had a home, left it, started out on the road doing pastoral ministry, and had been a Christian as long as I can remember. But I remember a couple years into pastoral ministry, sitting down to lunch with a colleague, and we were both had recently finished Willimon's book, that all shall be saved. And I'm trying to remember in particular what it was, but the general tenor or a thread throughout that book was describing God like the hound from heaven. That I wasn't in pursuit of God, that God was in pursuit of me. And just as you were just talking about, Jason, it's not like that was new information, but the waking up to that reality was an epiphany in that moment of my life. It connected.
Yeah. So probably the low point of the Mockingbird conference, I would say, was this my participation on a panel discussion.
Stop,
Friday.
stop.
It's like gas bag from Virginia just won't stop talking. But like related to these themes, I was trying to, because so one of the first questions was what makes for compelling preaching, and I really don't think it's a matter of style or rhetorical skill, or all the things that I teach in homiletics. So it's not form. It's what makes it compelling is when I know Josh Moneykaisen really believes what he's trying to tell me, and believes it's the most important thing that I can possibly hear today, for the rest of my life. That's what makes it compelling. And compelling conviction can make up for a lot of deficiencies in all the other, in style and form and rhetorical skill. But I made the comment that I think a lot of bad preaching, right, grows out of a misconception of who God is, a sneaking suspicion that God is someone other than who He's revealed Himself to be in Jesus. And so you can get the message of grace. You can rationally, cognitively understand the gospel, but you could still hedge and want to give a wisdom sermon or preach the law, or wag your finger and exhort people who don't see the world the way you see it. And what you were saying at the very beginning, Todd, it reminded me of this line from the end of one of the chapters in Robert Capon's book collection on the parables. So it's a big fat book, and this is the one. These are the two sentences that I always remember, and I think it's great. Yes. If people haven't heard me say this, every Christian and non-Christian should be reading that book once a year. I really do believe that. So hold it up again, Josh. Yes.
Kingdom, grace, and judgment.
Yes. If you're lazy and or cheap, you can buy them in individual volumes. But anyway, the Capon's got this wonderful thing at the end of one of his chapters. He says, God is not our mother-in-law. Sexism aside, God is not our mother-in-law coming to see whether her wedding present china has been chipped. God is a funny old uncle with a salami under one arm and a bottle of wine under the other. We do indeed need to watch for him, but only because it would be such a pity to miss all the fun. I think bad proclamation grows out of bad perception of who God is. So,
Well, since Jason was on the panel and did well in pointing out a very valuable observation, you just should know that all of the panelists did a really good job tackling that particular subject. And nobody in the room thought a windbag from Virginia was anywhere in the room. They thought that someone who knew what they were talking about and believed what he was saying was actually communicating, I think, some very important things.
All right. So, any last thoughts, Todd?
I think the other thing I would do is just let folks know there is and maybe we could put this out some way, Jason, a link to some of the talks, because maybe some folks have never been to a Mockingbird, and so if you take Dave's start and then you take Harrison Scott Key's talk about his How to Stay Married book. If you like David Sedaris, you don't mind laughing your head off. The talk is tremendous, but it is another angle that really helps us gain a picture of radical grace. And I say that because knowing just sparse details, having not read the book and just heard what he had to say, that book never should have been written. There should have been a complete dissolution, go our separate ways. This is done. We can do better. And that's not to cast any sort of shade on folks who've had a terrible experience in life for one reason or another. But in this particular case, some of the details just leave you going like, I don't think I could do that. Someone would have died, and that he owns himself and what it took to discover that. And I just, you need to watch that. So we'll try to hopefully put that out there. I think they did record his talk, and that would be good. But there are several others, so I don't want to make it sound like there's only a couple. It's just that those were excellent bookends. That you had a perspective from as Jason mentioned, a junior in high school, and then you've got what's his first title of this book? A Very Large Man or something like that.
The World's Largest Man.
Yeah, The World's Largest Man is his first book. So a guy who can write something, like that, it was a good contrast, and it could sweep everything into it. The event in between those two talks.
I see that Bradley Gray joined. I assume that's Brad Gray. Maybe not. I can't tell. Somebody else so small. I think so. Todd, if people are not familiar with Mockingbird, I will say that 10 years ago, a couple of months ago, I went on medical leave and I tried to go to other churches other than my own so as to avoid being a distraction. I've said this in lots of places, but I want to say it again. And every church I went to here in Northern Virginia, it was soul crushing. And not because they weren't sincere, earnest Christians, and I'm sure like they were good, faithful churches. But nowhere did I go where Jesus was the main thing, and the gospel was the main message. And it caused me to do some soul searching about how I'd been conducting myself as a preacher. But it also, I stumbled upon Mockingbird at the same time, and that kind of became my lifeline. And so, I will talk about Mockingbird in ways that no one has ever heard me talk about the United Methodist Church. And I've not heard you talk about the Southern Baptist Convention, Todd. And this is a segue to Stanley Hauerwas, because Stanley is difficult to pin down in terms of tradition and denomination. And I think one of the things that makes Mockingbird vibrant, and I stole this insight from Ken Jones in his book on the Augsburg Confession, that the future of Christianity is not denominations. The future of Christianity is like-minded tribes. In addition to theological insight, I also got some sort of virus at Mockingbird. So, excuse me. And my dogs are wrestling in the background. So, but yeah, so I think one of the great things about Mockingbird is it gathers believers and people who are curious from all sorts of places that are supposed to be at odds with each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be arguing about, theological issues or politics, and they don't.
And Dave said up front early in the conference this year that I can't remember the statistic, but it was close to half were first-time attenders of the conference this year. So people are hungry and they're finding places to experience the big relief.
Speaking of relief, Todd.
Okay, I gotcha. So, Josh, I don't know. Maybe you have uh, a greater familiarity with Hauerwas. I read. Um, it's probably been 25 years ago. I read um, Resident Alien. Hmm. And that was my introduction to Hauerwas. And um, and then he came and spoke at a small event in Edmond, Oklahoma, probably in the early 2000s. And the context was medical ethics. Um, and so that was an interesting, catch. But until I felt competition with Stanley Hauerwas for Jason's affection, I have not read a lot of Hauerwas. Um, in terms of a lot of his books, I was given a half a dozen like 2 or 3 years ago. They're down in the list, but I did pick up um, Jesus Changes Everything, and I'm just about finished with it. And I wonder, like, what sort of influence or what sort of background reference or what sort of reading have you done in Hauerwas that you could kind of help those who may have you in trouble pronouncing his name after seeing how it's spelled?
Yeah. I'm trying to think how I first. So I mentioned a moment ago that Willimon, Bishop Will Willimon's been influential, and they've been close friends for a long time at Duke Divinity School. Um, and that's probably how I first came upon Hauerwas. And I think that he's a Texan. um, and he can be salty, and he got for a moment there he developed a reputation for being someone who was loose with cuss words in Christian circles, and he didn't want to be known for that. But he gets it honest. He grew up in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. He was the son of a bricklayer. He grew up from knee high to a grasshopper, was a laborer out there, and in a time and in a place where race relations were fraught. He was a laborer alongside black people, um, laying bricks. And uh, he graduates high school, goes on to 4-year college, and then ends up going on to Yale Divinity School, and becomes an academic. He liked philosophy. Um, he says that he needed Christian friends and mentors to hold him accountable to making him a Christian, because his experience of a uh, conservative fundamentalist United Methodist background, where you went to church on Sunday morning, but real church happened when you went to Sunday evening service and you sang all the lines of Just As I Am, and you had to, walk the sawdust trail every Sunday, all that kind of stuff. It just didn't register with him. But as he grew up, um, the formation that happened with the apprentice-like formational work of learning a trade influenced his academic theology and Christian discipleship. Yeah, I don't know what else. What else should we share about Hauerwas?
I
Jason
don't
already
know.
noted that he's a hard guy to pin down because he's been called. He likes the Catholicity of the broader church, but he's a avowed pacifist. So he claimed something from the Anabaptist tradition. He said the only thing that people could agree about the Anabaptists at the time was that everybody wanted to kill him. You know, um, He is a communicant in an Episcopal church for the last several decades. Um, he is, even though in one sense he can be imposing and gruff and blue collar, and that's held in tension with this person who reads like drinking water and writes at the same pace. Um, he is he has a long tradition of making friends. As an academic advisor, he has had over 50 PhD students where he walks alongside them and befriends them, and he sees his vocation as um, an extension of the ministry of the church. He doesn't do this just to pay the bills. He doesn't do this to become famous. He's trying to be a faithful Christian. And in the process, he's not afraid to tell people the truth bluntly. But he has um, he may have bent bones and rough hands, but he's got a big heart for sure.
Well, before Jason jumps in, I will tell you that when you started off that he was from Texas, we who live in Oklahoma have a saying: "You can tell a Texan, but you can't tell him much." So to have and I have a daughter born in Texas, so I hope I didn't offend half of the audience here, but he is a force.
Yeah.
He is a force. Jason, you got you've like pen pals, phone calls, pray for Harawas over the phone. I mean, is there anything you'd add to what Josh has kind of given us?
I mean, the title of this book is Jesus Changes Everything. I think this is an homage to when he retired. Duke did a festschrift for him. In the title, Sam Wells's sermon or whatever, as part of that was about Christ making the difference to everything. So yeah, I think Stanley is someone who changed everything for me. And so I've talked about that probably in too many places and too many times, so I won't belabor that here. But yeah, he's someone I happened upon. It was grace. Like I was just the right moment at the right time, and
Come on, you have to tell the Princeton cafeteria story. So you have to tell that story, just because I mean that also lets people know a little bit about, like, they could never imagine you're a contrarian in any way. So you need to tell that story.
So okay, all right. So I went to Princeton Theological Seminary. I had a lot of. The thing with Calvinists is they lure you to their school by giving you lots of money, and then if you don't become Calvinist, they take it away. So in seminary, I had a lot of side hustles. So I was the pastor of a little clergy killing church. I was the director of the after school program at a fancy private school. And I also waited tables at the Wednesday faculty lunch every week. And right off the bat, early in the fall of my first semester, Professor Max Stackhouse, who is from the Calvinist Kuyperian School of Christian Ethics. For folks who don't know those words, it's basically like, how can Christians best resemble the world to tell the world what to do? And Max Stackhouse was bald, and he was holding court at the faculty lunch, holding everybody hostage to his opinions, raging about someone named Stanley Harawas. And he would not let it go. And his whole head was about as red as mine is right now. And his like vein here was just, I thought he was going to have an aneurysm on the table. And, given my personality, I was like, well, holy shit. Like, whoever this guy is, like, if he's interesting enough to piss this guy off, like, I got to check him out. And so as soon as the faculty lunch was over, I walked across the street to the library. And I checked out a couple of his books. And more importantly, even, I got a set of cassettes of lectures he had done at Princeton a few years earlier than that, called Discipleship as Craft. And I listened to those cassettes back and forth to my little clergy killing church. I listened to them so many times. I still know all the words to every lecture in order. I can repeat them. And I blew out the cassettes. And I started a pen pal relationship with him. And so, uh, it's not just that he's hard to pin down; it's that he is a Texan that can be told things, right? Because he uh, he has a Catholic affinity, because his first big teaching post, was at the University of Notre Dame. So he was surrounded by Catholic neighbors. Um, he was challenged by a local United Methodist pastor, that if he was teaching theology, it's like completely inappropriate that he wasn't committed to a local congregation. So he ended up being a key part of a local Methodist church because a pastor called him out and he listened. It was part of his friendship on the faculty at Notre Dame with a Mennonite, John Howard Yoder, that convinced him to the truth. Not even to the truth, just the inevitable conclusion of Christian nonviolence. If you believe X, Y, and Z about Jesus and what God has done in Jesus, then of course the church has to espouse nonviolence. So he was persuaded to that. And so he's hard to pin down because he's listened to friends over the years and kind of cobbled those positions. And so, because we kind of pivoted to this book without any warning, I'll give people time to order it. And we should say too, I don't know how to say this charitably. There are two different tribes of flavors or stripes of biblical scholars and theologians in the world. There are those who think their primary audience is their professional academic guild. And so they write and speak with their colleagues in mind. And a number of them may or may not be professing Christians or a part of the church. And then there are biblical scholars and theologians who see themselves as primarily servants of the church. And if you read Stanley's memoir, he talks about how he couldn't have that just as I am sawdust trail experience, and he felt inadequate because he couldn't have that born again experience. And so in lieu of that, he dedicated himself to service to the church, which took the form of theology. And so he really does think of himself and everything he does as in service to the kinds of people who are listening to us right now. And so, his audience are not theologians, they're preachers and believers. And for that reason, you don't have to have any expertise to dip into anything he's written and to understand most of it. His prose is distinctive, but it's not hard. He's very accessible in that way. And in fact, most of the things that he's written aren't like books. They're lectures that he was asked to deliver. So most of his writing is a response to something that someone or some group has asked him to give a word about. And so it's clear in that regard. So I want people to get this book because they've taken passages from all of his works and turned it into a sort of devotional, not unlike the Means of Grace book that Eerdmans did from Fleming Rutledge's work. But this is from the introduction, who is Stanley Hauerwas, and Charles Moore, the editor, went into the Duke Divinity School library to go through all of Stanley's writings. And here in the introduction, he offers just a sampling of the way Stanley talks Christian. And so I think this is a good way to give people a sample. The gospel is about Jesus Christ, not about love. Todd, prepare yourself to talk about that. Number 2, the worst kind of unkindness is to rob others of their rights to suffer. 3, some marriages are miserable not because people are not committed to marriage, because that is their only commitment. 4, to be rich and a disciple of Jesus is to have a problem. 5, following Jesus is never safe. 6, if we are honest, we find Judas appealing. 7, the wealth of the church is the poor. 8, war is but the desire to be rid of God. 9, the whole point of Christianity is to produce the right kind of enemies. 10, Christians are revolutionaries, but we believe the revolution has happened, and we are it. And what's crazy though, like if you read them, like I mean, you could just at random pull 10 other sentences. This is just the way he writes and talks.
Yeah.
And it, Josh and I at least exist in a denomination where frequently preachers will say that, like, well, I've decided to be prophetic next Sunday. And usually what they mean is I'm going to virtue signal to my clergy colleagues and like-minded followers on social media. Like they don't mean I'm going to suffer the courage of my convictions and alienate people without concern for the consequences. Stanley is prophetic in the sense that he really is convinced of a handful of Christian convictions, and really doesn't give a damn what you think about it.
That's true. And yet, if people are unfamiliar, I want them to know that Stanley, Stanley will say things like it's hard. He recognizes it's hard to proclaim truth because it's among people that you love. Right. So he doesn't, he can be confrontational, abrasive. I love that Stanley was one of the leading people that taught me that Christians have problems with war, right? With killing people. He's not afraid to speak about his convictions publicly and full-throated, but he's also not dismissing people. He's in love with Jesus, and he thinks this is true, and therefore the truth needs to be proclaimed. And so he'll say it, but he acknowledges the difficulty of, not somebody on a soapbox in a public forum, but living with people in a congregation and still saying the truth of what needs to be said.
Yeah. So what you're getting at is this second assertion here: the worst kind of unkindness is to rob others of their right to suffer. That it's a higher form of love to speak the truth, to speak what you believe to be the truth to someone, even if that lands inconveniently and uncomfortably with them.
Yeah. And then the people, I mean, all of us, but the people in the pews experience what he'll turn around. He'll talk about, denying suffering is parents do it to children. We don't want to make our children suffer for our convictions, and therefore we protect them in ways that do disservice by not telling them the truth about who Jesus is. So yeah,
I remember. So I've had Stanley come guest preach a few times. The last time was on Christ the King Sunday, 2019. And it was not a sermon about Donald Trump, but he mentions Donald Trump in it, about him being a bore, which I think that's a nonpartisan observation, but
a bruta figura.
But I was standing with him at the doors to the narthex after the service, and a worshiper came up to him after the service and was like, I was really troubled by your sermon. I just thought it was so inappropriate. And, would you have preached that same sermon when Bill Clinton was president? And Stanley looked at him like crooked, and was like, "Well, I did preach that sermon when Bill Clinton was president." I'm like, and I don't give a damn how you feel about it. That was the word of God. But but that like it's Christ the King Sunday. And so Stanley's not someone who is going to defer to your feelings or how he feels about you, to not, pay homage to the king.
Yeah. He
Yeah,
will
and I
not
think
let
that-
us get away with saccharine sentimentality.
and that actually gets at that first point that you read. The gospel is about Jesus Christ, not about love, because it gets at it maybe more indirectly than we would have tackled it had you all not brought those couple of bits up. But today the concern is, one, we don't define love well, and two, we don't because we want it to be ambiguous enough to cover whatever position we take to be least offensive. And so when he describes or says the gospel is about Jesus Christ, not about love, it's about a person, and he's been, as you describe it, taken in by that person. And so to try to departicularize, I don't even know if that's a word, what God has done in Jesus Christ is to substitute an ambiguous emotive thing. We generally use it as a noun, not a verb anyway, and kind of sidestep. Well, would you have preached that sermon if Bill Clinton were president, or did you, kind of thing? And so I think that gets at it. I think the other thing that Crackers and Grape Juice did was boil that down into another saying of his: Jesus is Lord and everything else is bullshit.
I mean,
So
he said that. We just turned it into a T-shirt. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I think that becomes that constant theme that this is about Jesus, and to make it about anything else is actually to do a disservice, not just to the gospel, but the people we're gospeling along the way.
Yeah, Stanley will often say that Christianity, is an adventure through which you acquire friends you would not have apart from Jesus. And another theologian very important to me is Robert Jensen, and I would not have sought out Robert Jensen at Princeton at the Center for Theological Inquiry if I didn't already know who he was through the footnotes in Stanley's work. And so because they're friends, I knew he was someone that I should read. And it's Jensen who makes the point in writing about Christianity in a post-Christian world, that we have to be careful as Christians to not talk in abstractions like love, grace, even justice, forgiveness. That Christians have to be the people that say to other people, like, when you use a word like love, when you use a word like inclusion or welcome or justice or grace, what you really mean is this particular person. And it's that identity that we have to point people to.
Because these words aren't known apart from a story, and at the center of the story is a person, Jesus Christ.
Right.
Yeah. So we have to. Another thing Howard Ross will talk about is we're talking about friends that we wouldn't have had otherwise. He'll talk about the Christian we. He's famous for telling the story about in his growing up years, the Lone Ranger was a big TV show. Lone Ranger and what's his name, Tonto, and he says they're standing there on the hills of the Lakota Sioux, and Lone Ranger looks over at Tonto and says, well, what are we going to do about this? And Tonto looks back at him and goes, what do you mean we, white man? Like, who's the we you're talking about? Because here are all the indigenous people. you're the one that stands out. And Hauerwas will do that with the Christian we, because too often we are the tribes that we're a part of around our politics, our affinities, our loves, desires, things like that. And then we sprinkle Jesus in, or, God, in service of the things that we already believe and cherish. And Hauerwas won't let you do that. They'll say, here's Jesus. God has spoken through Jesus. You know, what are you doing to obey the word that God has spoken? And that's why I can't kill somebody else created in God's image. That's why I have to befriend this person who has different politics than me, but we're both baptized followers of Jesus. There's a different we that is constituted by relationship with Christ. Jason, you're muted for me?
I'm sorry.
Barely saw your mustache.
The subtitle for this is A New World Made Possible. And yeah, I think Christians, Protestants in particular, we can maybe go astray sometimes when we deal in categories like law and gospel, or grace and command, or promise and command. That Stanley is someone who simply believes that Christ matters for all things that matter.
Mm-hmm.
That if God really has vindicated Jesus by raising him from the dead, then that has a whole hell of a lot to say about more things than just Todd Littleton's private, personal piety.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not to encourage exhortation all the time. It's just to say that, if Christianity is going to be coherent, it has to be a cosmic, holistic message. Todd, you look like you've been diligently following the comments.
Yeah, I see. There've been some. We had Jason at our church in Newport, and those things.
I remember you, Sue.
And then Maley, kind of along that line is grace.
I remember you, Maley.
Is grace without forgiveness? So, Josh, you want to tackle that question? Yeah, I mean, I think, and I don't know, may want to, kind of follow up a little bit, but I take it that was when we start talking about Christian words, like Jason was talking about grace or forgiveness or whatever words we're going to use. We're talking about a person. So then, when you kind of get down to it, that is grace without forgiveness. How do you? Maybe the question more, or the idea that maybe has in mind is, you can't tell either about either one of those without talking about Jesus, in order for them to be understood rightly.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that a bit of it.
It means I can't remember what you were asking me, or Josh, but
I was just repeating the question.
But since these, the big relief is Jesus, not a category called grace.
Correct.
Forgiveness is not a category or a pronouncement or a process. It's the person born to Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it can never be prescriptive. That, forgiveness in Christ might look different for Josh Moneykeisen than it does for Todd Littleton, because it's obedience to a person. It's made available to all through his person and work. But because it can't be known apart from him, and more importantly, the body that he's created called the church, it will always look different.
Folks, Jason is going to have a large cup of Turkish tea when he's finished with our time tonight. So he will be better.
This is the most I've talked all day.
Callie, I don't think Josh and I should respond to that. So we got a few minutes left, Jason. We didn't really kind of exchange texts or emails, the three of us, about kind of how do we want to approach this. We want to. They're really brief, folks. The chapters are really short. It's actually more of a pocket book than Fleming's The Crucifixion. And so
You've read it. You tell us.
Yeah, I actually think, despite my remark when we were together, that we might combine a few of these. Maybe we start and for folks who haven't had a taste of its writing and that sort of thing, maybe we take say the first 3 chapters for next week. And
Okay.
folks, what I'm alluding to is that at a point when you get to the second half of the book, and since they are taking these from various places of Stanley's writing, some of them are going to sound like you're rereading the same thing, and so you'll need to look for nuance. Why? What was said in this chapter that differs from that's all in the same section under the heading Kingdom Economics. So maybe we get into reading Stanley, reading a few of the chapters together, and then we can decide, do we read the whole section, when you get to the latter half of the book. But that's just a thought. So
All right. So get the book if you haven't already.
Okay. Yeah.
Chapters 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Come follow me, Far from the Shore, the Kingdom in Person. And maybe to connect the threads. A lot of these chapters themes will recur, because Stanley has a very high ecclesiology. And so if there's a point of divergence between Mockingbird that we talked about at the beginning, and Stanley, is that Stanley has a very high ecclesiology. And for a lot of Mockingbird, it's a low ecclesiology, or it's just assumed. And that's probably, despite the fact that we as Methodists lost Stanley, Josh. Stanley's like every freaking guest I've ever had on the podcast who's like, well, I used to be a Methodist. It's just like we just bore people into other denominations. Freaking drives me crazy. But
you bore them, we shame them.
But where you see, I think where Stanley is still a Wesleyan is that he is very much a sanctificationist, and believes he does not believe. So like, what's the line about how Jesus came preaching the kingdom and the church came instead? Stanley is not one who believes the church is an accidental voluntary association. That it is the embodiment of Jesus, and it's what he died to give birth to. That we are supposed to be a community that lives the difference that Christ makes. That's literally a lie. See, like, he's so in my head, like I'm plagiarizing him without even intending to. So there are a couple of sermons I've preached over, like, even just at Annandale. So, like, Maley, I challenge you to go back and find the sermons where Jason was sitting at the Swiss Bakery off of Braddock Road, and I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to try to write a sermon in the voice of Stanley just for fun. I've done it twice. And I even sent one of them to him, and he thought it was something he wrote. So,
challenge accepted. There you go.
If you listen to it enough, it's a style you can imitate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last word, Josh.
Have you instituted a policy where you have to declare how much money you make at your baptism?
No, but Dennis Zulu is going to volunteer that next Sunday in worship. So
Ooh.
Nice.
I never did hear. So I told Dennis to go to a particular place for his wife's birthday on Sunday. I haven't heard how it went. I presume they're still married, but
He might reply here in a second.
I mean, she's a nurse, so she's used to caring for people. Clearly, if it was horrible, what?
Sounds like a little
Well,
conference session is in order.
So we are going to continue meeting here on Substack live. Substack will only allow us to have 3 panelists at a time. And so it was for white people, he said. Okay. I okay. All right. I owe you dinner, Dennis. Because that's definitely a for white people place now that I think about it. So, all right. What makes it with the most for white people is that it's like next door to a hipster bar, or not bar, a hipster barbershop. So it's for like people who have Josh's hair. That's where they go get their haircut. I went there once, like years ago, and he was like, "There's not much I can do, man." So he's like,
You could get the
just shave
handlebar
it."
mustache.
There you go.
So we'll be here. And this will
Yeah.
post some other time. And so if you have questions, you can leave comments there, and we will put a link to Mockingbird, so that you can access the recordings.
Yeah. Good.
It's good to
It's
see you
good.
again,
It's
Todd,
good.
after 14 hours.
Yeah. Good to see you as always.
But
You too, Josh.
So like Todd, so when you and I were in Israel, or not Israel, when you and I were in Turkey,
Right.
Peter Kwan, my associate pastor, informed my congregation that I had gone to Turkey with Elaine Woods, who was on my staff, and created a little bit of a rumor. And then yesterday in the pulpit, you tell everyone that you and I shared a bed in New York City. So you're just,
Just trying to keep it real.
I mean, I'm like Elon Musk without the billions of dollars.
Oh, wow. There you go.